All right, today we're jumping into the story of a man who is, well, a real paradox. His name is Bartolomé de Las Casas, and his life is one of the most radical transformations you'll ever hear about. A journey from being on the absolute wrong side of history to becoming one of its greatest heroes.
And that really kicks things off with a massive question, right? Can a villain actually become a hero? This isn't just some hypothetical thought experiment. It's the real complicated tension at the heart of the story we're about to get into.
Yeah, because here's the thing you have to understand about Las Casas. His story doesn't start with him being a saint, not even close. It begins with him being an active participant in a truly brutal system of exploitation.
So, to really get his journey, we have to start with the man he was at the beginning. A man of, let's just say, some pretty deep and troubling contradictions. So, picture this. Las Casas is born in Spain in 1484, and by 1502, just 10 years after Columbus, he makes his way to the Americas. And like a lot of other Spaniards, he became what was known as an encomendero. Let's be really clear about what that means. He was given land, and with that land, he was given the indigenous people who lived on it. He was a slaveholder, plain and simple, and he got rich from their forced labor. And you really can't understand the man without understanding the world he lived in. So let's talk about the brutal system that was basically the engine of the whole Spanish conquest. Okay, so the engine behind this whole thing, it was a system called the encomienda. Now, on paper, it sounds almost bureaucratic. The Spanish crown would grant a conqueror the right to the labor of a group of indigenous people, and in exchange, the conqueror was supposed to, protect them and teach them about Christianity. But, of course, the reality on the ground, totally different. It was brutal. This was a system designed for one purpose, to squeeze wealth out of the land and the people. We're talking gold, food, and just back-breaking labor. It was this quasi-feudal setup that led to unbelievable abuse. People were literally worked to death. This was the machine of oppression, and for years, Las Casas was one of the guys turning the gears. The scholar Father David Arique puts it perfectly. He calls it a systemic injustice. And that's so important because it wasn't just a few bad apples. The cruelty was baked right into the system itself. But then, and this is where the story gets really wild, something starts to change. This man, who is a direct beneficiary of this awful system, begins this incredible, lifelong transformation. Now, this wasn't some overnight flash of lightning kind of thing. No way. The sources show it was more like a series of conversions, one step at a time. First, he gives up his own encomienda. He walks away from his wealth and his power. Then he joins the Dominican order, so he can use their influence to push for reform. And what's really amazing is that his conscience just kept expanding. He eventually became one of the first and loudest European voices to condemn the horrors of African slavery too. And look, I get it. It's really easy for us to look back now and just call him a hypocrite, right? But it's more complicated. A better way to see it is as a constant, ongoing conversion. This painful, lifelong process of seeing the world more clearly and trying to make his actions line up with his new beliefs. And all this inner turmoil and public advocacy, it finally boils over into this huge, high-stakes public showdown that would echo for centuries. The humanity debate. Get this, in 1550, the Spanish king literally hits the pause button on the entire conquest. He calls for a formal debate in a city called Valladolid, and the question on the table was just staggering. They were there to decide the very nature of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Were they fully human? What rights did they have? The fate of millions of people was hanging on the outcome of this debate. And in this debate, you have two completely opposite worldviews just smashing into each other. On one side, you've got Las Casas. His argument is simple. Indigenous people are fully human, end of story, so evangelization has to be peaceful. On the other side is this famous scholar, Juan Gines de Sepúlveda. He actually uses the philosophy of Aristotle to argue that indigenous people are natural slaves who need to be conquered with a sword and torch war, he said, for their own good. This is where Las Casas does something brilliant. He takes the very logic his opponent is using, Aristotle's philosophy, and he flips it completely. He argues that actually, if you look at their societies, their laws, their art, their cities, they meet all of Aristotle's own requirements for a civilized society. The conclusion was explosive. They deserved freedom, not conquest. So, what was the result? Well, officially, the debate was kind of a draw. No one was declared the winner. But its legacy, wow. that's a whole other story. Let's talk about why this 500-year-old fight still matters so much.
I mean, it's really hard to overstate just how much of an impact Las Casas had. His radical idea that every single person has inherent dignity, no matter their race or religion, that's the philosophical seed for what we now call human rights. His belief that you can't force your ideas on others, and that it's society's job to protect the poor and vulnerable, you can hear echoes of that in social justice movements for the next 500 years.
But maybe the biggest lesson here isn't just about history, it's about us. His life is this powerful reminder that real conversion, whether it's moral, spiritual, whatever, it's not a one-time event. It's a process. It never really ends. He shows us that we're all works in progress, and that we're always capable of seeing things more clearly and changing for the better.
You see, that debate, it was a fight for the very soul of a nation. It forced an entire empire to look in the mirror and confront the huge gap between what they said they believed and what they were actually doing. Which, of course, leaves us with one last question to think about. What are the defining moral debates of our time? Where are the systemic injustices we're being called to see? And what would it look like for us to begin our own conversion?